The star is in well-preserved condition, including the water channel that surrounds it. However, the southern part is missing, and it is very likely that the citadel was part of a much larger whole. The whole area was a continuous landmass that completely disintegrated due to the drastic event. It is good to work with the timeline in Google Earth. This image shows the collapsed area that is now the seabed. Now let's take a look at what makes this area special. Hundreds of collapsed grating bars strewn on the seabed. Some are still part of the land. This bridge with the road is probably in fact a defunct canal covered with limestone, as we will see later. As you can see, the road crosses islands that in some places protrude above the surface. They are calcareous, and the canal is part of them. At this point it passes through a marshy area in which other grates are emerging. At the top of the image we seem to see the connection of another canal. To the right of the submerged canal is very likely a slab. The debris of the grate is again visible in these places. Let's take a more detailed look at the debris hiding on the seabed. The depth here is not very big. They are still visible and special. I have to admit that I didn't expect such a large amount in the Google Earth images. Here they are joined into a broken square. The original sunken islands. Here we find something we already know from other areas of the world. We will now interrupt our virtual tour for a moment. We'll look at images from other areas to compare these locations. We recently saw these formations in Normandy near the monastery on Mount Saint Michel. Or in the Everglades swamps. Spikes between rock lava flows at the Air Force Base, California. And in the flooded grates of Gulf of Kutch near the fabled city of Dwarka. The same at the bottom of the Venetian lagoon. Spikes also line the canal around the Salton Sea in California. We find the same situation in Tibet. And the same lines cross China's Xinjiang. Now we will go back to Sri Lanka and continue from this lost canal. A closer look reveals that it is lined with hundreds more pieces of collapsed grating. It appears that some are still connected and shaped into these spikes. There are a huge number of them, and we will see many more. Some are still part of the limestone islands. Here they are also. They are connected to the mainland and still form a grid. How many are there under the surface on land? They are in very preserved condition and some seem to have some sort of connecting lock. Another spikes. The circular markings are the probable connections. They really do seem to be connected by some kind of rings under the sediments. The shadows on the perimeter of the island section are either remnants of the partitions or damage from their rupture. In the upper right part of the picture you can see a canal. Another debris field. Here, too, we find spikes folded perpendicular to the shore. They appear to be part of the island. A close-up view of the collapsed land and the grid, which is covered with a thick layer of limestone. The bridge over the strait also makes use of the partially collapsed partitions of the stone grating. We can see the remains of the attached partitions at the bottom of the lagoon. Limestone sinkholes are everywhere. Here's a nice example of a sinking surface. All that's left is a stone grid covered in sediment. You can see that the vegetation is clinging by its roots to the bulkheads. And not just here. Some parts are sunken deeper, as in this case. They're still visible. And here is an illustrative example of how the surface sinks along geometrically constructed partitions. Let's go back to the sunken island plates and look at the other anchors and their connections. I kept thinking about the mechanism of the connections. It's a mystery, but I'll try something at the end of the video. Maybe there was another waterway that led through here. There are anchors strewn all around. This is probably the best find. It gives us an idea of what the mainland was like. But we can't talk about a real mainland either, more like islands that were floating on these grids. But what was holding them up? Gigantic columns? Grids buried on land. These fields are found all over the planet and some even have patterns. You can see the three most common ones at the top right. another part of the grid with flooded land around. Area with circular formations. They can also be found in many other places where water seeps beneath the surface. Part of the deformed grid and field with anchors. A huge area of collapsed partitions that are still part of the mainland. Here it is one partition covered with lime sediment. We know the same from beaches, for example. I was surprised that the details are very visible. As if something happened here only recently. Amazing. We will interrupt our journey again for a moment and look at similar areas on our planet. This is a sinkhole in Duoling in the Taklamakan Desert area. The anchors are very clear and are still part of the stone grid. We recently saw the same situation in the Grado Lagoon in Italy. The lost canal connected to the Anka. Saint-Étienne, southern France. To understand just how gigantic these structures are, take a look at this image of the coastline of Western Europe. The arrow indicates parked cars. New Mexico. We see a sharp transition between the two areas and the remains of the partitions. This place is interesting because of the waterfront between the limestone hills and the plain. It appears that the water areas were covered by these limestone formations. Let's go back to Sri Lanka. This road again uses part of the collapsed frame. Some of the rungs perpendicular to the frame have disappeared, but we can still see their location in the limestone bed. On the next picture we can see the outline of a submerged island plate with part of the waterway. Sunken island boards beneath the calcareous layer. Geometric sinkholes on land. It is very likely that many of these pools became part of Indian temples. A calcified island slab with geometric shapes. Hundreds more broken partitions and anchors line the area. Such a construction is really beyond the power of man. Another bridging of the lagoon. In this case it may be the use of an old waterway. Note the unevenness and also the wider areas. These may be circular connections of the side partitions under the sediment layer. Another of the many flooded areas. The adjacent island area still retains geometric fields that are fringed by vegetation. The last evidence of the vanished islands is given to us by these remnants of grates on which the waves of the sea break. Note the spike at the top with the circle. All under sediment. The sea currents constantly carry away the limestone sediments. At the same time, they erode the structure of the limestone windows and cause subsidence on land as well. At the end of the video, we'll try to figure out the mystery. We'll take another look at the lagoon bypass. The placement of anchors and partitions, including the circular ending, can look like this. This is suggested by the location of these anchors. This is the situation at the Air Force Base in California. But it's a little different. There's no anchor curvature. Dry China Lake, California. Here we can see the remains of the anchor joints under the sediment deposit. The territory of Syria was very likely affected by the melting of the bedrock and huge volcanic activity. The consequence is deformation and displacement of everything on the surface. Could this be a stellar citadel? How the anchors were connected we can only guess. Or do you have another idea? Let's look again at the situation in India. Stone grating flooded with water. On it lie carved gigantic slabs. Are these the actual slabs of Moses? Slabs carved by the word of God.